Our destination is a remote ghost town in the Panamint Mountains. And I'm here all by myself. What could go wrong? The non-hiking portion of our trail starts at a much more accessible ghost town called Ballarat in the Panamint Valley, where we trade pavement for varying conditions of dirt road. The town, founded in 1897, lasted only a few years before being abandoned. There's now some relics to peruse, a primitive campground, and if you're desperate for an expensive soda, a small store/museum. 2 miles later, we start the 5-mile climb to the mouth of Surprise Canyon and the Trailhead. Depending on your timing, the road might be freshly graded or rutted from the latest flash flood. For this reason, I suggest only taking a high-clearance vehicle, preferably with 4-wheel drive. At the road's end, there are the remnants of a small mining operation called Chris Wicht Camp. Wicht came to the area in the early 1900s, ran the bar in Ballarat, did the occasional prospecting, and had the kind of initiative you'd gotta love. He installed a soaking pool here. I'm going to admit my stupidity. I did this trip at the end of June when the desert temperatures were hitting the mid-90s. So, I arrived in the late afternoon, camped here for a pre-dawn start the next day. Maybe get in a cool morning before the heat set in. Word of warning, the only trail signage other than a few indiscriminate cairns is at the trailhead. From this point forward, the path is often indistinct, overgrown, or lost in the rocks. However, the only direction you can go is up the canyon, so at least you won't get lost. For the first mile, we hike up a narrow slot, passing or just splashing through 7 waterfalls. There is no getting around it. You're going to get wet. I don't know if anybody has bothered to check out my footwear, but I'm wearing my canyoneering shoes for the first couple of miles as I splish-splash up through the stream. The reason for that is these will stick to wet rock almost invariably. And then once I get out of the stream area, I'm going to put on my regular hiking boots and go from there. Now, if you don't have canyoneering shoes, I'm sure sneakers would be just as good. And then bring some other shoes for the dry trail. In case you're wondering if this is how people got to Panamint City before it was deserted, well, yes and no. They did travel through Surprise Canyon, but there was a road at the time. Yeah, that's right, a road. Seems they filled in all the rocky bumps and forced the stream underground. And then the stream fought back with the occasional flood that scoured out the canyon. Each time the road was rebuilt. Finally, the road was wiped out for the last time in 1984 by a wall of water described by some as 40 feet high. While most of us might see this route as being reduced to foot traffic, those with 4x4 Jeeps saw a challenge. Now, you might consider this heroic or stupid, but they winched their way up through the canyon, with vehicles tipping over or otherwise getting stuck. Finally, the BLM ended this off-road business in 2001 to protect the riparian environment here. The Jeep people fought back, claiming a Civil War-era law allowed them to not only drive here, if that's what you want to call it, but also rebuild the road. That didn't go very far. And now, with the canyon largely undisturbed, some 50 species of birds come here. The rare Panamint alligator lizard lives among the rocks, and bighorn sheep come down here to drink from the year-round stream. Now, all of this is to say, Surprise Canyon manages to stiff-arm all but a few hikers, and according to one source, only 100 a year attempt to make the trip. Looks like someone lost their sunglasses. I can see how. This thicket is nasty. It probably just ripped them right off his head. The route, I refuse to call it a trail, dries out for nearly a mile before we come to Limekiln Spring. There is a rough path veering to the left that avoids the lush thicket generated by all the water, but it's not easily spotted. I blundered straight ahead through a tunnel of vines and branches, which, if nothing else, kept me in the shade for a little longer. Finally, after about 3.5 miles from the start, you'll see a small campsite to your right, and a few steps later, plunge into another thicket, where we come to Brewery Spring. This may or may not be the last water source for the day, so I'm filling up just to be on the safe side. Now keep in mind, this shade here, it's going to end and the canyon's going to open up and it can get pretty hot. So it's a good idea to have a lot of water on you. By the way, it's called Brewery Spring because a man named Munsinger made beer here. However, he lost his enterprise in 1876 when a flood came through and destroyed this and Panamint City up above. Loaded down with a few pounds worth of water, we continue climbing. Occasionally, you'll recognize the path as once being a narrow road, but most of the time it's just a rocky track that requires some imagination to picture it as ever being traveled.
Now, if you're enjoying this video, please hit that like button. It contributes to getting my video out into the YouTubeosphere, and that helps me out a lot. So thank you. First thing we see at Panamint City is that 250-foot high smokestack, which was part of a smelter used to process silver ore. Now, after hiking through the canyon with all those wrecks or relics, this might seem like a natural part of the landscape, or an intrusion on the wilderness. But trust me, after hiking a mile to get there, this canyon, however remote, isn't going to feel the least bit untouched.
And finally, we reach Panamint City. Believe it or not, we're walking on what was once the town's main street. My suggestion is to stop at the first cabin, known as the Panamint Hilton. Room service not included.
I could just rest for a minute.
Aside from the mice running throughout the structure, the cabin does have a feeling of rustic ambiance. With the knick-knack wind chimes hanging in front, and notes from past visitors scribbled on the walls. People do sleep inside, but you might feel more comfortable camping at one of the level spots nearby. Because I was the only person there, I figured I wouldn't get in anyone's way by bunking on the front porch. From here, we can start exploring, beginning with the smokestack, if you so choose.
This chimney, famous by some standards, was made from brick formed by Chinese labor and fired in a kiln down the former road from here. The top was fluted to increase the draft-sucking smoke that was generated down here. Now, this is my second trip to Panamint City, and I gotta say, I'm still amazed this sucker hasn't toppled over by this point. Okay, as with many places like this, it's going to take some imagination to picture what it was like about 150 years ago. So let's start before there was a town. Seems 3 outlaws stumbled into this area looking for a hideaway after they robbed $12,000 from a stagecoach. And they found silver. They had one problem. Fugitives can't exactly walk into town and file a mining claim. However, they knew a Nevada senator with the same amount of scruples as they had, who offered to buy their claim in exchange for a pardon. They made a deal. Now, as was the case back then, word quickly got out about the rich lode, and by 1874, Panamint City was booming with 2,000 citizens, 700 of them miners, and a reputation as being a hellhole. Now, despite that, there was a bank, post office, Miss Delilah Donahue's Wyoming restaurant, the brewery I mentioned, 10 saloons, the Emporium of Harrison Rhine, and a red light district featuring Martha's Camp Girls. Building lots sold for $1,000, which in today's money is more than $26,000. Then in July 1876, just as rumor had it, the silver was running out. A wall of water, described by witnesses as being 7 feet high, wiped out all of this. Parts of Panamint City washed all the way down into the Panamint Valley, miles away. Now, a lot of what we see today came later when a mining company tried to revive the operation. It went bust.
Before we get too comfortable, we do need to address our need for water. To locate the local spring, which I can't guarantee will be running, begin by climbing up toward the cabins behind the Panamint Hilton. Look for the remnants of a road and follow it to the right, more or less north, searching for broken remains of a pipe. Once you've spotted that, continue until you find the small water tank on your left and water pouring out a small pipe. The next morning, I took a few minutes to wander about the remaining structures. On a previous trip with more adventurous friends, I also explored some of the mine shafts. It's up to you how much risk you want in your life. But isn't it obvious how dangerous this can be? There are also several cabins tucked away in the trees. Plus, if you feel ambitious, you could also summit nearby 9,600 feet high Sentinel Peak. As for me, it made more sense to get an early start before the heat rose above 90 degrees. Even at 6,300 feet in elevation, Panamint City can get pretty hot in June. So, best to go in the winter and do as I say, not as I do.